Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of A Novel Review, the book podcast where every week I review a different book. If you are a lover of books, you are definitely in the right place because this week is no different. Today I am reviewing The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. It is September, which means we're kicking off a new month of the World Book Tour. If you are new here, every month for 2025 I am traveling to a different country through books. I will read 2 books from the respective countries. The rules are simple. The authors of the books have to be male and female where possible. They have to be born in the country and they have to be writing about that country as well. So I want to get quite an in-depth cultural experience and try sort of understand their culture a bit better. See if there are any similarities between the book, discuss those similarities after I've reviewed the second book, of course, not before. And just try to have some fun and of course, broaden the reading horizon. So today we're kicking off the month of September, the month of India, The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. And then in 2 weeks' time, I will be reviewing this book, The God of the Small Things by Arundhati. Last month, I went to China, and that was a great month. It was actually probably a bit of a mixed month. I didn't particularly enjoy one of the books as much as the other, but that's okay. That's just the nature of reading. You're not going to like everything, and if you liked everything, there was probably something wrong, because you probably shouldn't like every single book you pick up. You've got to have that tension somewhere. So let's get on. Actually, no, first let's say thank you. I've got a little list here of people's names. I just want to say thanks so much to everyone that supports the pod. Of course, I greatly appreciate you. Thank you to everyone that likes and subscribes and comments. I just want to give a special shout out to my new Patreon subscribers, Edwil, Alexandre, Lonnie, and Pilar. The 3 of you, thank you so much for signing up to my Patreon. I greatly do appreciate it. Thank you so much. I wanted to give you a special shout out because your support is immense, a little baffling because it's just not something I'd considered, but absolutely immense, and I greatly do appreciate it. I don't know what else to say other than I'm blown away by your generosity and support. To everyone that has bought me a coffee, thank you so much. Coffee is a lifesaver, as it is for a lot of people, and I really do appreciate that. Everyone that likes, comments, and subscribes, like I said, I really appreciate all you guys. Ziggy, Wayne, and Greg, the 3 of you have emailed me in the last sort of week or two to have a brief discussion about a few different things. I really love that. I really love when listeners reach out and want to discuss different things because, obviously I get to give my opinions without any kind of, discourse. There's no back and forth here. It's just me talking to a camera. So to hear other people come back and agree or disagree with what I've said, I absolutely love, because there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with someone, as long as you're disagreeing well and respectfully, of course. But yeah, thanks so much for reaching out. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and thanks to everyone for listening. I just greatly appreciate you also. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get into the book now. The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. I will hold it up for the benefit of those on YouTube because the last few weeks I've gotten quite into talking about covers of books, and this is quite a nice cover. It's very bright, it's very vibrant. I absolutely love it. It's very eye-catching, I should say, because we shouldn't judge books by their cover, and yet we invariably always do. So, I don't know, it feels a bit like an original cover. A lot of covers are quite similar these days or follow a particular theme. So this one was quite nice, very lively, caught my eye, and I was really impressed by it. It was the winner of the Man Booker Prize in 2008, though I will be honest, I'd never heard of this book before, and I looked at the other books for the Man Booker Prize that year, or the Booker Prize as it's now called, and I recognised none of them. I only recognised the author Salman Rushdie, who was longlisted, I believe, but in terms of the titles of the stories of the novels, I didn't recognise any of them. That, of course, is means nothing, because that doesn't mean, just because I haven't heard of them doesn't mean anything, other than they haven't come across my radar yet. I will say I don't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect when I first picked up this book. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did, and then with the added weight of finding out that it won the Man Booker in 2008, I think created a tension, a bit of a swirling tension that I found interesting in the early stages, because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this, but obviously it's won the Booker Prize, so it's obviously very enjoyed in some regard. I will say I actually quite enjoyed this story. I thought it flowed very nicely. It was very, very readable. It's not too complex in terms of how it's written, but I'll speak about that in a second. And the story was relatively interesting as well. So quite a nice story. I will give a brief overview. The story is about Balram Halwai. He is an Indian guy who's telling the story kind of retrospectively. He is now an entrepreneur, as he constantly reminds us throughout the story. And he's writing an extended letter, and by extended I mean it's the entirety of the book at 321 pages long, to a Chinese premier who is paying a visit to India. And the idea of the story is that he's writing this letter to the Chinese premier saying, like, they're obviously going to show you India and tell you you're seeing the real India, and this kind of quote unquote in quotation marks, the real India. But look no further than me. I'm a rags to riches kind of story. I've grown up in India. I've seen it all. I've come from nothing and I am now kind of everything. So look no further than me. I'm a true Indian. I represent everything that is good and bad about this country, but really I'm just an authentic Indian character. You know, I have seen the bottom of the bottom of the pits, the top of the tops. So look no further than me. Like I said, it's this rag to riches story because he starts off, you know, in a low caste of Indian society and quite a poor person, and then rises to the top. We do find out in the incredibly early stages of this novel, so it's not a spoiler, that he is also a murderer, and he murdered someone, which I think is, sometimes it annoys me when you find out those plot points quite early on. But I think having now finished the story, it's actually really important to get that vital piece of information quite early on, because I think if you didn't have that tension of knowing the story is actually building to something, you might think the story is a bit maybe wishy-washy, or doesn't really progress in a way that's particularly fast-paced. And so you might be like, well, why am I reading this? What's going on? What's going to be the end story here? It's kind of just this character moving through daily life in India, and it feels a bit sort of like nothing's happening. But then, of course, knowing that he's a murderer and knowing we're building to that particular tension point within the story, I guess you're kind of paying a bit more attention. You're looking for the threads that are going to tie him from becoming this relatively nice young boy to then becoming a murderer. You're looking for the little cracks starting to appear. You're sort of paying attention to different words being used and different sentences and the mental state as it progresses through the story. So I found it really interesting to reveal that quite early, and I found it really important as well because, yeah, it just builds this lovely tension throughout the story. So yeah, as I said, it's told, you know, through these letters that are being written to the Chinese premier. I found the structure quite nice for that reason. I felt it flowed relatively easy, and obviously getting it in sort of, I think it's 7 large chapters told across 7 nights and 7 letters. There are, of course, breaks in chapters and stuff within the letters themselves, places you can stop. But just that idea of telling it through sort of different sections and different stages of his own life, I thought made it quite enjoyable and a bit of a fun journey. And I think what I found is the writing style was very, very conversational, very free-flowing, but also very witty. And I found him an interesting character. He's very self-congratulatory of himself, you know, as you potentially would be, being a now upper-class member coming from a lower caste and lower class part of your country, rising through those ranks and now having a lot of money. You probably would, I guess, personify yourself in a, you know, perhaps not God-like position, but you would view yourself in perhaps a more powerful position than any other one else. And you would think, oh, I've done this by myself. And you would, you know, look at yourself in a different way and view yourself as perhaps more powerful than you really are. So he's really quite self-congratulatory, and it sort of comes out in, I think, bouts of wonderful sarcasm and witty humor. But I did read quite a few reviews after finishing this book, and it got a very mixed bag, actually. And I wonder if that's because it won the Booker Prize, that it kind of divided people a lot. But a lot of Indian people loved it and thought it brought great attention to a lot of the issues within Indian culture and Indian society. And a lot of people hated it and said it was just, you know, trashing Indian culture and Indian society, and was actually a poor reflection of what actually goes on. It really goes into the Indian caste system, the family values, the corruption, the poverty, the crime, the education, the lack of education, everything that's kind of, you know, right and wrong in this culture. It explores within this book, and I think that rubbed a lot of people the right way, and I think it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So something I think I was potentially going to be looking for in this story, but I noticed quite early on in the story, is the nature of colonialism within Indian society and culture. And I was interested to see what the response would be to colonialism and this state of the world. And I found the book actually quite, I don't want to say romanticizing colonialism, but it felt very apologetic towards colonialism. It felt like it celebrated colonialism in a few different ways. And so this is a quote that I'm going to read on page 63, continuing on to 64. So this is kind of what I was talking about. He's talking about how Balram is talking about how colonialism held them in kind of like a zoo and kept everyone separated and orderly, and then they left. And so this is the quote. And then, thanks to all those politicians in Delhi, on the 15th of August 1947, the day the British left, the cages had been let open, and the animals had attacked and ripped each other apart, and jungle law had replaced zoo law. Those that were the most ferocious, the hungriest, had eaten everyone else up and grown big bellies. That was all that counted now, the size of your belly. It didn't matter whether you were a woman or a Muslim or an untouchable. Anyone with a belly could rise up. And so you kind of read that quote, and I was like, oh, when I kind of read it, I was like, oh, Aravind Adiga or Balram as the character, quite enjoyed and liked the British rule within India, because it kind of held everyone in check in a way. And as soon as they were gone, then we had the crime and corruption rise up. Then we had this kind of this jungle law rise up, survival of the fittest rise up, and it just becomes a society of strength and might and power. And as soon as you're on top, you can just suppress everyone else beneath you. And that sort of, I guess, was an interesting line to read, especially this early in the story, because it changed my perception of what I thought was going to happen. Then, of course, now having read the story in this light and then read a lot of reviews, a lot of people, being attacked Aravind Adiga, the writer, for this particular sentiment that he's got throughout the story, this quite apologetic stance on colonialism, because he actually went to school in England, and it's saying, he's kind of trying to portray a lower class member of Indian society as an upper class member in the real world, and he's actually let his own kind of sentiments and affections bleed into the story in a way that isn't entirely truthful. It's really hard for me to make any comment on that, because I obviously have no idea. I've never been to India. I really do want to go there. The people look, well, every Indian person that I've met is incredibly nice. They love their cricket, which I love, and the food is absolutely incredible. Everyone from my family has been there and said it's just such a stunning place to go. So I'm actually absolutely keen to get there. But then, of course, it makes it hard in this instance for me to judge whether, is this a particularly truthful sentiment that's now threading throughout this story, or is this kind of like a learned sentiment, having then grown up within a different culture himself? There were other elements within the story that I felt were quite colonial, but these ones felt, quite truthful. That first one felt like it could be quite apologetic towards colonialism, but this next one felt quite truthful and I could just be completely misreading it. On page 154, they're having a conversation about pizza, and Balram can't pronounce a word, and he's a lower class member of society, and he's currently employed by these people, and he can't pronounce the word pizza, and it's something that he has never really come across within his society, because pizza doesn't exist, and these upper class members eat pizza, and they then make fun of him for not being able to pronounce a word, and he sort of goes through a list of trying to pronounce it, but it's something he can't quite get his tongue around, and he says pija, pajija, jipja, and pijja, and he's kind of like really struggling with it, and these upper class members of society are then making fun of him for not being able to pronounce this word, and it's kind of this really wicked and cruel way that these Western ideals or the Western food has infiltrated the upper class members of society, and then they're weaponizing it as a way to make the lower class members of society feel bad for something that doesn't affect them. And it's kind of, I think it's just, it was an incredibly confronting scene, because I was like, you're making fun of Balram for not being able to present a word that he's not really come across in his life. He's not really come across the food in his life, and he's unlikely to, because he's kind of entrenched within Indian society, and it's not something that's really, really important to him or the society that he currently exists in. But these upper class members are using it and weaponizing it as a way of just kind of further employing this idea that he's a lower class member of society. And it was, I found it really interesting, but also really frightening as well, how language and our pronunciation can be used against us potentially. And then I guess to further this final area that I found it really kind of hit the nail on the head was this moment that Balram he's a driver for this family, and one of the women within the family decides to take the wheel one night when drunk, and she kills someone, and Balram's in the car, and the family sort of come to him the next day, to Balram, and say, this person's been killed, and we know it was her that did it, but you are the driver, so you need to take the blame for this. And he is frightened, and he is shocked, and he is really, really scared, because he feels completely powerless in this situation, and he doesn't really know what to do. These people are his employers, but they're also kind of the people that control his life as well, and he feels completely cornered in that he kind of almost has to take the fall for these terrible people that have done this terrible thing in killing someone else. And it's a really frightening scene, because you really feel frightened for Balram in this moment, because he doesn't know what to do, and he's completely and utterly powerless. And he talks about within the story how if he took the fall, if he did admit to it and say, I hit this person and I was responsible, it would actually be celebrated within his own family as kind of this prideful moment of, look how good my son is. He takes the fall for those that employ him. He's a good lad. He really brings pride to the family, and pride to the family that employ him as well. And it's this really frightening moment where it's kind of like, this is the differentiation between the class systems, because these rich people don't care about you. They just want you to take the fall so that they can carry on with their lives, and they want to absolve themselves of the guilt they feel and the responsibility, and just pass it on to these lower class members of society who they have entrenched this idea of being pride and being prideful in your own servitude. And I just found that scene also incredibly frightening. And it's quite shocking that potentially happens. And Balram says, there are jails of Delhi, the jails of Delhi are full of drivers who are there behind bars because they are taking the blame for their good, solid middle-class masters. And it's kind of like this moment of debasement of the individual that I think really is shocking, and highlights the differences between these members of society. But then, interestingly, despite the fact that he's been through all of this, he then goes on to murder his master and claim all this money that was once his master's, and sort of do a really unforgivable thing in, of course, killing someone and then claiming all this money. And instantly he becomes this almost wealthy member of society, and he's kind of completely free within the constraints of himself. And there's this almost flicking of a switch. And on page 287, he's this character that says he's very, down to earth. He's an entrepreneur. He knows the heart of India. He's been through the struggles. He understands it all. And then there's this one it's a couple of lines here. He's going to give this coin to a boy, and he says, I reached into my pocket, searched for a rupee coin, checked to make sure it wasn't a 2 rupee coin, and rolled it towards the bucket. And so almost instantly, despite the fact that he's been sort of beleaguered his entire life and debased his entire life and made to work unreasonable hours for, very little money, he understands that this person now begging for money, he picks up a coin, make sure it isn't 2 rupees, make sure it's just 1 rupee, and then sort of hands the coin off. And it's kind of like that instantaneous moment of, you're incredibly wealthy, but you still don't want to spare a single rupee. And I just found that really kind of shocking. That to me was kind of the nail in the coffin for, he's a completely different person. Even though he's quite witty and he's relatively charming, and he's told this thrilling kind of tale in a very witty and enjoyable way, he has murdered someone, but he's also taken on this different role, and he's kind of lost sight of who he is throughout the course of the story, and he is now unrecognizable to who he was at the start, because money has completely changed and taken over who he is as an individual. I mean, all in all, like I said, I really enjoyed it. I felt the tone was incredibly conversational. It was really fun to read. It didn't take that long. Like I said, it wasn't that difficult in terms of reading the story itself. It does delve into some dark things, but all in all, it was a good story. It made me really, it was like kind of like I said, the perfect story to read for the Book World Tour, because I think it gave a wonderful snapshot and insight into Indian culture, into everything that's sort of wrong and right about Indian culture. Like I said, I'm going to now look into it a bit more, because I want to get sort of a greater understanding whether Aravind Adiga is painting a completely truthful picture. It's probably going to be a mixed bag, and you can't really say one or the other. It's going to be difficult, because you're always going to have people that have had different experiences within the culture, and to paint a completely truthful portrait of an entire country through one book is, of course, nearly impossible. So that was The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. I quite enjoyed it. I'm going to give this a 3.7 out of 5. Okay, so what was I reading this week? This week I have started the second book for the month of September, for the month of India. It's another Booker Prize-winning novel, which I didn't actually pick up on when I was purchasing them. The God of the Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Honestly, the early stages of this book, I'm talking sort of the first 40 pages, are a bit confusing. There's a lot of characters. They're jumping around between the different characters and they're jumping through different time periods. And you're still trying to kind of find your feet within the story, I found. So I found it a bit difficult to, I guess, place myself and place where the story is exactly at. But it has sort of shifted pace a bit in the second chapter. So I'm really enjoying that and really now finding my feet within the story. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it now. I feel like I'm quite solidly into the story and very much looking forward to where it goes because it sounds like a really great idea. I will bring you this episode in 2 weeks' time, so make sure you tune in for that. And then, of course, I'll compare the books and see if there's any similarities. So yeah, stay tuned for that. The God of the Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Well, here we are at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you perhaps learned something. I hope you enjoyed the book. If you have any recommendations, please let me know. If you would like to like and subscribe, please feel free to do so. So today, to take us away, I think a quote from John Berger, and he says that, "Never again will a single story be told as though it's the only one."